Good morning. Welcome to the Point. As the state legislature continues to mull over the budget during this spring session, we wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you to another of your new state representatives. This time from Ottawa County, newly elected Representative Bradley Slagh. Let's start from the beginning because a lot of folks who will be watching this today haven't met you. Now, you've knocked on dozens and dozens, hundreds, thousands perhaps of doors as you were running for office, but many of the viewers of this program haven't yet met you. So talk a little bit about your background. What did you do prior to running for office?
So if you're talking about this office or other offices, that would be
this
a
office.
Okay. So it started really with a banking background. I spent 18 years in the banking industry. FMB, First Michigan Bank, which was a long-time organization in the, many of your listeners will remember. And many of them would actually remember it fondly, probably. It was a great bank to work for and a great bank to use. Spent 18 years, 12 of them, then when Huntington bought them out, moved into Byron Center State Bank, so I've been a local banker. From there, I got a phone call one day that said, Brad, township supervisor died in office. We have to appoint somebody. I would think that you would be the perfect person to do this job. And so did a little research and threw my name in the hat, was picked to be the township supervisor for Zeeland Township. Spent about 6 years, just about 6 years there in that. Got another phone call that said, Brad, I think that you'd be the perfect person to be the next county treasurer. So I went and put my name in for a position that was open for an appointment and spent 12 years as the Ottawa County treasurer. And from that, it becomes an opportunity, can you serve? I got another phone call right after Daniela Garcia won. It said, Brad, she will now run for the Senate. So are you interested? And so I did the research and believed that it was just my opportunity to serve at a different level.
This is interesting because you and I, before we started this interview, we're talking about budgets in the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
And we're talking about $60 billion. And the complexity of those budgets, 6 of which you'll be dealing with directly. I mean, you'll be voting on all of them.
Right.
But as a treasurer and a banker in a background, that seems to have you relatively well situated, at least to understand the budgets, because they are very complex. So tell me about your focus now that you've been elected. How do you approach this budget process? Because it's something big to tackle.
It is enormous, Rick. The more that I spend time at it, the bigger it gets and the more complex it looks to me. And so much of it has to be done. Just you have to trust the other people who've been there much longer than I have, because all of a sudden I've gotten it thrown in my lap and here, you should know this. And so it's trusting there's a whole bunch of folks in the House Fiscal Services that helps parse that and look at it and give you ideas. There's some folks on both parties that have some fiscal understanding of the budget. So it's trying to spend time with those folks, get an understanding of what things they believe we can do. How can we, I really truly believe we're going to have to raise some revenue. How do we do that? And how do we do it in a way that makes sense across the board, fixing as many things as we can and filling as many potholes as are out there.
Well, it's an interesting circumstance to be in because if you're going to have more revenues, and I assume let me not assume anything. When you say more revenues, is that primarily because of the condition of roads and that we need more investment in infrastructure from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think we have, over time, there have been multiple groups doing multiple studies that say, you know what, our roads do need to be fixed. There is a need for a way to be able to fund that. I don't know what those are. Either we have to cut other things or we have to raise revenue. So those are both things that we have to look at, is both can we cut, can we raise, and how do we do those things probably together.
On a regular basis, about this time every year, we talk about the budget a little bit, and people say, well, in a $60 billion budget, there's got to be enough money to do all of the things you need to do. And part of the problem with that is that about 50 billion of those dollars are either constitutionally already directed or federal pass-through or drawdown or what have you. You've got about $10 billion that is in the general fund, general purpose, but about, I don't know, 80% of that is used for health, human services, and those kind of things. So the amount of money that's truly discretionary in terms of the budget is relatively small.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you try to make these decisions and when you talk about cutting, you're talking about cutting out of a very small portion of the smaller portion of the budget to begin with.
That is exactly right.
So if you're going to have more revenues, the governor has put her plan forward, which would include increasing gas tax by 45 cents a gallon. And there have been a lot of folks who have said, well, that's a lot all at once, but that comes up to the 2.5 billion that at least some of the groups have said you need to work on roads. Is that the kind of revenue you're talking about, or are you talking about finding a soft landing space somewhere between 0 and 2.5 billion?
I think I'm going to be in someplace in that. There's someplace between there. I'm not sure where that is or how we get to that. Part of that for me is we have given an uptick in the dollars that have been made available to the road thing over the last, I think we were at 3-point-some billion in roads. We're now at 4.2 or 4.6 billion this year. And that was part of that agreement to change the taxes and those kinds of things. And we had determined that we shouldn't dump all of that money in right up front, because if we dumped it in all at once, it was going to be too much. We don't have enough vendors, road workers, that kind of thing to be able to make all that work. So I think we're going to have to be wise about how we look at this budget as well. If we raise 45 cents and you end up with an extra $2 billion all at one time, I don't truly believe there's enough road construction companies in the state to be able to take that without inflating prices a lot.
And some people call that artificial inflation when you have that money in there. Still, the other side of that equation is that those roads aren't going to be fixed overnight. This is a very long-term process, and voters don't always have a great deal of patience, and they already talk about the money that's being put in the roads, and the roads aren't being fixed. But this is still a decades-long project, or at least 10 years.
Yeah, but it's been decades getting here. We didn't do inflationary kind of thing on road taxes or gas taxes in the past. And I guess, part of our concern, just as just enough party stuff to just at least communicate on it, is there is dollars that the road, what we're saying is road funding is not all going to roads. So it's going to backfill into the general fund, which is already got dollars that's going to the higher ed, and so we're backfilling and doing some things, turning things around in the way that's happening. So do we really need all of it? If we need all of the 2-point-some billion, then we ought to be figuring out a way that it must mean that there's more that we need than that, because there's backfill to be done on the general fund.
When you take a look at this budget, and I don't expect you to be an expert on it by any means, because you've only had a couple of months to really get into it deeply, but when you take a look at how some of the silos are set up, and how the governor pointed out accurately in her budget presentation that some of those silos are being siphoned off and the money's going other places, does it make sense, and not to tie you to the numbers specifically, but does it make more sense to you as somebody with a lot of financial background that you do keep all those monies separate and going where they were first intended to go, at least from the standpoint of creating some type of trust with the taxpayer?
Yeah, so I would contend that there's probably reasons for us to look at where are all of the tax dollars going to, and put them back where they should be going to. We can look at downtown development authorities, so just something that's local, but a downtown development authority supersedes millages that were voted for a school, voted for an ISD, those dollars are siphoned off and go someplace else. Do the people who actually are paying the taxes know that what they voted for is not getting all the dollars that were there? So I think the answer is yes, we should be looking at where do they go and how do they get there.
I didn't intend to spend all of our time on budget, though it is a very vital issue and it is certainly topical, but talk to me a little bit about your purpose for running. Obviously you had opportunity and you had background and support, but what are some of the things that in a perfect world you would be able to accomplish in your time in the State House?
So I guess I didn't come to Lansing with some grandiose purpose that said, yep, we're going to move in this direction. I think really filter for me is everything that we bring to the table, everything that I vote on should have some component of how do we do this as much as we can at a local level. I think that there is value in having local authority, local autonomy for making decisions, and so how do we move the needle back toward locals? That's, once again, not to say that making decisions at the state is the wrong answer, but it's a both and maybe. And I think, to be real, I'm really interested in education. How do we move the needle on our educational system? We're behind as a state. There's some awesome things going on in different places. How do we take the best of those things and move them forward so that we are doing better by our children?
Apparently, I can't help myself. If you're going to talk about education, you have to talk about budgeting. So let me ask about that. And again, understanding that you've only been in Lansing for a brief period of time, but increasingly over the last, I would say 3, maybe 4 cycles in the House, the 2-year session time, I increasingly hear people talking about changing the way we finance our schools. Now, we, back in the 90s, made big wholesale changes about how to get money to schools. And even in this budget, the governor is trying to get the gap between schools and that discrepancy. But is it time to have a conversation about at least looking again at how we pay for education in the state?
I think it is. I don't know the answer to how or what that should look like, and I wouldn't pretend to do that, but I do believe that it is time for us to look at that.
That would be an even heavier lift than the final question I'm going to ask you about, and that's auto no-fault insurance. Again, very new for you. Not that the system is, but the idea of changing it. And I know that Speaker Chatfield has put together a work group that's looking at that. Do you get the sense from your colleagues that is something doable, or is there the sense that we've got to look at it because we said we would, but like many other legislatures that have come before, it's a hill too far?
I do not believe it's a hill too far. I truly believe that there is a will. So here's my take on it. When I went into the city of Holland, the city of Zeeland, the city of Hudsonville, and knocked on doors regularly, people said, roads and the no-fault insurance, we have to fix both of those things. And I don't think that was a rallying cry for legislators as they were at the door on the west side of the state for many years. I don't think that people had that same kind of response at their doors. When we get it on the west side and they're getting it on the east side, it seems like all of a sudden there's way more interest in all of the people coming to the table saying, we have to have a fix.
That's Republican Slagh's take on the new legislature. Next, a Democrat from Calhoun County to the point. There are any number of new legislators we want to introduce you to, and as time goes by, we'll get to all of them this morning. Another newly elected in 2018, Representative Jim Haadsma from Calhoun County. Representative, I want to start by congratulating you on your election, even though it's been a few months. I'm still getting to some of the newer representatives in our viewing area. For those people who haven't met you, and I know you were knocking on doors furiously during the campaign, so folks in your district obviously know you. But for the rest of the folks who haven't met you, tell me a little bit about yourself, about your background, your professional history, and how it brought you here.
Sure. My name is Jim Haadsma, and as you might understand from a name like that, my grandparents came from the Netherlands and then to the west side of Grand Rapids. And my parents ultimately ended up in Muskegon, which is where I spent much of my formative time. And my parents ultimately became foreign missionaries. I was overseas as a high school student throughout my high school years in Africa, and came back and attended college and law school here. I've been practicing as a lawyer 35 years and 32 years in the McCroskey law offices out of Muskegon. I staffed the Battle Creek office, where I went down and took over that responsibility back in 1994. So I'm a Battle Creek, not native son, but adopted hometowner, and it's a great community in which I live, and very pleased to have had the opportunity, as fate would have it, to land in Battle Creek.
You obviously have a very successful career over those years. You don't stay with one thing that long and not have some success. What made you decide to get involved in politics? Because this certainly is not your first foray.
So I've been involved in politics in the Battle Creek area for many years. I first became involved in the way that I've been for over 20 years when Mark Schauer, the former congressperson, ran for the State House back in 1996, and then ultimately became chair of our local Democratic Party for several terms in the last 20 years. And then ultimately became a county commissioner in Calhoun, representing Battle Creek City precincts on the county board for 8 years. And then in late 2015, several people approached me about running. I thought it was an opportunity to do so at a time when I thought our state needed zealous representation and our community of Battle Creek needed zealous representation. I enjoyed the experience in 2016. Didn't enjoy the outcome. It was 209 votes separating from Dr. Bison, but took the opportunity when Dr. Bison determined to run for Senate to try it again. And I did it mostly because I enjoyed all the meetings I had with different people, the stories I heard from different people in the district, and thought, let's reprise this, and different ending this time, and great opportunity to learn new things. If you're a curious person with a lot of interest, it's an opportunity when you're on different committees like the Energy Committee or the Transportation Committee to learn a lot of different things other than the law practice stuff that I've learned and continue to learn in over the years.
If time permits, we'll come back to the Energy Committee. If it doesn't, we'll talk about it another time, because that is one of the more fascinating committees in the town because of the really big long-term issues that you have to deal with. But I want to stick with you primarily right here, because you decided to run and you have won. But when you were having those conversations, as you were going to door and talking to people in Battle Creek, what were the things that they said that they wanted out of a representative, or more important, things that they thought Lansing needed to do to help them and their area?
I think that they needed communication regularly from a representative and expectation that they were going to have an advocate in Lansing. They certainly were prioritizing roads both in 2016 and 2018. I heard a lot about the roads. I think that Governor Whitmer has run mostly successfully because of the fact that she's prioritized the roads in her messaging in 2018. I too heard about education and the affordability or absence of affordability of secondary education. And interestingly, in 2018, something I didn't hear about in 2016, notwithstanding the fact that we'd already by that time had the Flint water crisis, but oftentimes it doesn't hit home unless it's in Springfield or just up the road in Parchment. I heard a lot more this time about water issues. When we had manganese in the water back in the early summer in Springfield, and then when we had PFAS in the water in Parchment and in Springfield, lots of people concerned about water infrastructure in 2018. So I'm confident they want a vigorous advocate who's going to zealously represent them in ensuring that they have safe drinking water, they have good roads, and good public K-12 education and affordable higher education in Michigan.
Let's talk a little bit about water, because that issue is becoming more universal. Obviously, throughout West Michigan, we've seen instances of PFAS from a little to a lot. Other contaminants that have been found in other communities. We know lead is a problem in a lot of our older infrastructure cities. When you think about water, and when you think about what the state's responsibility to try to, if not fix it, at least make sure that they detect if water is clear, what can the state do? What should they be doing to help places like Parchment, or places like some of the townships in Kent County, or the folks over in Gaylord? This is really going to be something I think we find more and more, at least that's what the experts say, is that it's likely that more places will show up with PFAS and other new emerging contaminants.
I concur that we're going to see a lot more of it given the widespread usage in the past, and it's not going to be just in Oscoda and Rockford, but it's going to be lots of places. I think the state should invest more money in the study of PFAS and how to contain it and how to treat PFAS. I think that water service line replacements have to be prioritized by our state. I think all this takes injection of dollars, and Governor Whitmer has, in her budget presented back on March 5, outlined $120 million that would be directed toward some of these kinds of strategies: PFAS study, PFAS remediation, and service line replacements.
I want to talk about roads a little bit because it's a subject we've been covering for decades here in Lansing. In 1996, if memory serves me, we were out at Delta Township talking about something called Build Michigan 2. Since then, every governor and every legislator that has come through Lansing has tried to do something to get roads better in the state of Michigan. The general consensus is they aren't. The governor has laid out her plan, and it will be negotiated probably throughout the summer, or throughout the spring, I should say, into early summer. What can we do to, you can tell me what you think about the plan, where you think we ought to go with roads, but what can we do to try to convince voters, your constituents, that you're really doing something about the roads? Because that fixing the roads isn't going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen the next 2 years, the next 4, or probably even the next 6 or 8. It's going to be a long-term project that's going to take a lot of money.
You, with the history you have, well know how long this has been an issue. This has been an issue for 40 years, and we haven't invested, we've divested in our roads for that entire period. And I think that we're paying the price for not doing due diligence all that time, not changing the oil on a figurative car, and now we're having to do an engine replacement, or looking at it a different way. It's like if we had a diet the last 4 years of fried chicken, cigarettes, and beer, and all of a sudden we're being told we got to get buff. And it's tough to do that, but it's irresponsible to continue to not go forward and make better roads for Michigan and ensure we have infrastructure which is going to be attractive for economic development and attractive for young families to continue to live in Michigan. In terms of what the governor proposed, it's a first pitch. I think lots of people understandably respond very negatively to what's perceived as a regressive tax or a user tax at 45 cents per gallon over 3 stages. I'm confident that there's going to be negotiations, as you've indicated, between the legislative leaders and the governor to get to some point where, by a mix of different revenue, we're going to be able to do better than what we did in 2015, when we essentially came up with some short-term funding which slowed down the deterioration of roads but did nothing even short-term to improve the roads. We have to get to the goal that the governor has set out, looking at 2030, to have 90% of our roads in good or excellent condition by that year. And we can't continue to ignore the circumstances we're in, or we'll end up in some Mad Max world, which will be very, very deleterious to economic development, to community life in Michigan.
We'll have more when we come back to The Point. The big focus for the legislature will be the budget over the next few weeks, and we'll be focusing on that as well when you join us Sunday morning to The Point.